they do in China romanticize Mao kicking out the foreigners. That's the big thing. Like Mao in China is, obviously is a genocidal maniac that killed millions of Chinese people. Okay.
Yes.
But because he won, and because the Chinese Communist Party has an interest in portraying itself as a continuous entity, because Deng Xiaoping, basically what he did was like a coup in 1978. The way he took over China. Very few Americans know about this. Should I talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, please. I don't know the history of it.
Okay, so the thing is that, how did China get rich? It was this desperately poor communist country that somehow managed to level up to such an extent that it's contending with the US. And the simple, and I'd say kind of, it's one piece of it, but sort of the dumb explanation is, we outsource all the jobs. That's a piece of it, okay? But why did they go there? How did they execute? They obviously executed. They built up their cities. They built up their navy. They built up their IT. Clearly they executed as well as being the beneficiaries of some of the outsourcing or whatever, right? And what happened specifically? So to make a very long story short, after World War II, the nationalists and the communists who had fought together against the Japanese occupation, had a truce, they resumed fighting. So Mao and Chiang Kai-shek, the communists and nationalists, resumed fighting. Mao eventually won, basically because, there's a whole thing on who lost China. And there's an argument to be made that guys like Owen Lattimore and Edgar Snow was this journalist from a few decades earlier who had written these hagiographies of Mao. By the way, many of these communist dictators, some great people to Google. John Reed, he's buried in the Soviet Union. He wrote the account of Russia's revolution, 10 Days That Shook the World. He's buried near Lenin because he's so holy in the Soviet Union. He's this journalist that glorified them. Edgar Snow glorified Mao. Walter Duranty glorified Stalin and the Ukrainian famine. And Herbert Matthews was responsible for Castro taking over Cuba. So many of these things were actually Western impositions. And when you drill into what happened in China, Mao basically was able to beat Chiang Kai-shek because guys like Owen Lattimore in the State Department pulled support. And this is controversial. There's books on it at the time, like Who Lost China or what have you. But it's a little bit like, if you think about the Israelis and Palestinians today, Republicans back, roughly the Israelis, Democrats roughly back the Palestinians. You can argue it's not completely polarized that way, but it's kind of like that. And sort of in the same way, Republicans backed the nationalists and Democrats were not exactly pro-communist, but there are many that were anti-communist. And so they didn't think that Mao was going to be that bad. They were influenced by Edgar Snow's book, like Red Star Over China. Guys like Owen Lattimore were sympathetic to it. They thought it was anti-colonialism for real and be okay. Net is the US did not back hard enough. Nationalists were driven to Taiwan. The communists won. And then Mao began consolidating power. And there's obviously many other things that happened, the Korean War, et cetera. But the what would happen over the next 30-something years is that the Great Leap Forward happened, where agriculture was collectivized, millions of Chinese people died, and the Cultural Revolution happened from 66 to 76, where it's basically like wokeness. Everybody is denouncing everybody. The professors were sent to the fields, and the students were encouraged to kill the professors, literally kill. To get a sense of it, you know how crazy college campuses are in the US nowadays?
Well, I know how crazy they were from 2004 to 2008.
Okay, fine. But they're crazier today. However, the level of craziness they got to in China during the Communist Revolution or during the Cultural Revolution was, during that period, kids at Tsinghua were, which is like the Chinese MIT, were grouping into factions and machine gunning each other on campus.
My God. Wow.
Okay, that was what China was like over that period. Just total insane communist anarchy. It was Maoist. It was
what period was this?
66 to 76.
Wow.
Actually, if you want flavor of what happened there, there's this great book. This is a famous book, but the Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu. Okay, famous, basically maybe the most famous Chinese author right now. Read just the first chapter of the first book. And even though it's fictionalized, it'll give you a sense of how insane China was under communism. It's just simply not for many reasons, it hasn't been documented in movies.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is that China itself kind of wants to kind of whitewash that history. Yeah, that was in the past. Let's like forget about it, whatever. Right. And there's a lot of Americans who are like quasi-sympathetic or even outright sympathetic to communism and think, oh, it had good intentions. Nazism is really evil. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so the media on this has not actually been made, but there's an opportunity to show what it actually was. By the way, if anybody wants to do that, that's the kind of thing I'd love to fund, to put some Bitcoin in somebody doing that. Okay. Just showing what the history of communism actually was, because you have no shortage of drama. You have the Berlin airlift, and you have the Cultural Revolution, and you have the Great Leap Forward, and you have the 100 Flowers campaign, in the Eastern Theater and the Western Theater. Berlin airlift is happening in Europe, the 100 Flowers in China. All this stuff is happening. And it's like incredibly dramatic, and you can just take it out of a Wikipedia article or a Britannic article, whatever, and turn it into a script. And it's just like, just down the middle. You don't even have to make it up. It's just, you wouldn't have to fictionalize it.
Yeah.
But okay, coming back to the stack. So net is this insane communist state was killing people, pitting people against each other. By the mid 70s, there's enough folks who had enough, but obviously there's no election or any way for them to voice it. Deng Xiaoping had been purged multiple times in China. Today, we would call that canceled. Okay. Mm-hmm. In under communism, purging typically meant you lost your life, liberty, and or property. That is, you were shot, jailed, and or robbed. Okay. But Deng managed to kind of duck and like kind of avoid it, where he was purged, but he was so competent that like they didn't actually kill him. He had enough sympathizers that he could like hang on to the margins of society. And he made his way back. In the chaos after Mao's death, he essentially managed to get enough of the military guys and so on his side that he outmaneuvered the so-called Gang of Four and managed to take control of China around 1978. And most people were okay with him taking control because they thought, among other things, that he was very old. And so he wasn't going to be able to make it. He was in the 70s when he took total control of China. But the guy was so competent that for the next 14 odd years, he managed to run China. And like he ran a turnaround of a communist state where there's probably countless people who wanted to assassinate him. And he managed to turn it into this capitalist machine, make peace with the West, and lay the foundation. It's actually like really kind of insane level of turnaround. Like Ezra Vogel has a good book on this. Now, Deng did other things. Deng did Tiananmen. And so he fired on the group of people who was protesting. And so that's why a lot of people dislike him. And I can understand that.
Let me ask one question here. Was part of this, because I've heard Peterson talk about this, that China opened up, I think this started in agriculture actually, that they were having food shortages from the communistic model. So they actually opened up agriculture to competition. And so they started adding these capitalistic elements under the communistic state. Is that what enabled them to become the production factory of the world effectively?
That's part of it. There's actually a good, like kind of quick article on this called The Secret Document That Transformed China.